Good evening, everyone, and welcome to United Way Oxford's Community United Conversation webinar series. My name is Kelly Gilson, and I'm the Executive Director with United Way Oxford. And I am thrilled to be able to be here this evening to be joined by this wonderful team on our panel to talk about a really important topic for our community, for every community, frankly, and that's harm reduction. And I think it's something that we all need to understand a little more about, and we are in good company to do so this evening. So if I could start by saying that I'm actually in the United Way Oxford office here in Woodstock, and I would like to do just a quick land acknowledgement to get the evening going. And I would ask, while I reflect on our land acknowledgement for our location here, while you at home take a moment to think about the land from which you are on this evening. We will begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous lands and that have been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the very beginning. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, as we gather here, there have been Indigenous peoples who have been the stewards of this place. In particular, we acknowledge the traditional territory of the Ananashpik, Lenape, and Haudenosaunee. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic and current connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions of the Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have had and are making, both in shaping and in strengthening this community in particular, as well as our province and our country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of the current contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our community, and in particular to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across our country, and in memory of the deceased children and the survivors of the Indian residential schools. So again, please take a moment to reflect on the land from which you're participating from this evening. And thank you for taking that moment. So let me begin by just doing a very quick United Way 101, if I may, especially for some people that might be joining us for the first time. United Way Oxford is a local charitable organization. We are all about building a stronger, healthier Oxford County for all. We are 100% local. We invest in three community priorities that we've established with specifics underneath, but one is moving people from poverty to possibility, building healthy people and strong communities, and ensuring that kids can be all that they can be. And as we invest in all of those human services with our amazing partners, we really do work to build opportunities, to strengthen resiliency, to ensure that families and children are supported, that we have that human social net to give people the help they need and the hand up when they need it as well. During COVID, we started doing these conversations via webinar because that was what we could do. And we have found it to be really impactful because the beauty of this kind of venue is that we can record it, and the recordings are available on our website. So if anyone is interested in showing it at their workplace to do a lunch and learn, or at their book club, or at their church group, or any other organization or situation where you think this is a topic that would really resonate, I urge you to check out our website, and you can access the video as well as all of the past webinars, Community United Conversations that we've done on a host of social issues. And we're also very, very fortunate to have the support of Rogers Cable, who graciously play these after the fact so that, again, people at home who maybe hadn't heard about it in advance or weren't able to join this evening are able to learn a little more. And the whole point of these series is what we say is to shine a light on unignorable issues. We talk about a variety of different social issues. We want to learn more. We want to dispel myths. We want to make sure that people understand what supports and services are available locally. So we really want to just build our capacity as our community, to build our caring capacity, our empathy, but also our ability to help and to know where to go to get help. And so through this session, I will just, remind people, if anyone is triggered and is looking for, is a little unsettled and is looking for some support, reach out is a 1-800 number that you can connect to. And just so you know, reach out is 1-866-933-2023. The other thing I will remind you is at any time, 24/7, you are always able to call 211. And 211, for those of you who aren't familiar, is an information and referral line with trained professionals who can make sure that you are connected to the supports and services and programs and information that you need. So those are just a few little tidbits off the top. The other piece I will just mention is, I know that for many people, United Way is known as a fundraiser. And we often say we're well known, but we're not known well. And so the whole point is, yes, we do fundraise, but we fundraise in our Oxford community in order to have the financial ability to invest in these critical programs and services. And so above and beyond the fundraising piece, United Way works really hard on things like this to make sure that we're building awareness and understanding, working on volunteerism, building capacity, trying to connect individuals or companies to programs and services. And so if you want to learn a little more about what we do and why we do it, please feel free to visit our website, which is unitedwayoxford.ca. And you can also sign up for our e-newsletter to learn a little more on a monthly basis about some of the things that we're doing and some of the amazing work that our partners are doing as well. And so, as I said, the goal of this series is to build awareness and empathy, to dispel myths, and to really, help build our community up so that we can understand what the needs are, where there may be gaps in services, and how we can try and help those in our community who really need a helping hand. So this is a virtual world, and while it's fantastic in 1,000 ways, it also has its challenges, including sometimes unstable internet or, like a stray dog that might wander through the screen. So I ask you at home or at work to bear with us as we get going. And so I would like to now introduce you to our panelists. We are blessed to have a number of amazing local folks who are going to be able to share their personal experience, their knowledge, their connections. And our topic this evening is on harm reduction. And I think it's one of those topics that for those of us that aren't working in the ground in this particular area, we might know a little, we might have a thought in our mind about what it is, but we probably don't know an awful lot. And so we really want to learn what harm reduction is all about and why it matters and why it's helping people survive and thrive in our community. And so joining us this evening, we have Lisa, who is a public health nurse at Southwestern Public Health. We have Tanya, who's an addiction counselor from the Canadian Mental Health Association, Thames Valley Addiction and Mental Health Services. Say that fast 3 times. We have Lily, who is the manager of Counterpoint Harm Reduction Services with the Regional HIV/AIDS Connection. And we have Sarah. And Sarah is a registered nurse, and she's with the Oxford County Community Health Center. And so each of these wonderful panelists can do a far better job introducing themselves than I can. So I'm going to start right now and ask, oh, actually, no, I'm not. Before I start, I want to open this with a quote, and then I will ask each of them to introduce themselves in a much better way. And I found this quote. I don't normally do this, but I thought I found two from an author that I particularly like that I thought would be a really great way to open this session and to close this session at the end. And so this is a quote from Dr. Gabor Mate. This particular quote comes from his book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction. He's a Canadian doctor who spent much of his career working in Vancouver on the downtown Lower East Side. He is an expert in addictions and services to help folks. He's an author. He's really quite interesting. And his quote here is, "Not all addictions are rooted in abuse or trauma, but I do believe that they can all be traced to painful experience. A hurt is at the center of all addictive behaviors. It is present in the gambler, the internet addict, the compulsive shopper, and the workaholic. The wound may not be as deep and the ache not as excruciating, and it may even be entirely hidden, but it's there. As we'll see, the effects of early stress or adverse experiences directly shape both the psychology and the neurobiology of addiction in the brain." And I thought that was really a really wonderful way to kind of ground us as we get started. So following that quote, if I may, could I ask each and every one of you to introduce yourselves, your role, and just say a little bit about your organization, in particular to our topic this evening around harm reduction. And Lisa, I'll pick you as my box to the left to get started.
Okay. And what a great way to start. I love Gabor Mate. Any quote of his is awesome. I love him. So my name's Lisa Gillespie. I'm a public health nurse and I work at Southwestern Public Health. And we cover the areas of Oxford County, Elgin County, and the city of St. Thomas. And our programs, we have many, many different roles in the community, but our programs respond to public health emergencies, promote healthy lifestyles, help prevent injuries, illness, and disease, and promote positive change in social conditions that improve health for everyone. We deliver mandated services under the Ontario Public Health Standards and are regulated by the Ontario Health Protection and Promotion Act. So the program that I work in sexual health and harm reduction programs. So that needle exchange program is one of our harm reduction programs that is mandated under those public health standards. So we'll get talking a bit more about that later, but that's the lens that I come from today. So thanks for the invitation to be here, Kelly.
Thanks for showing up. Sarah, how about you?
Sure. So I'm Sarah. I'm a registered nurse and I work at the Oxford County Community Health Center. And the Community Health Center does lots of different things in the community. We are a family doctor's office, but we also have outreach, social work. I can't list them all, dietitian, physiotherapy, lots of different things. But I think the roles that really apply to the conversation today is the mobile health outreach bus that we do a few days a week, go out in the communities of Tillsonburg, Woodstock, and Ingersoll, and just kind of connect with people who are underhoused or homeless and speak with them about what it is that they need. And distribute harm reduction equipment, as well as the Rapid Access Addictions Medication Clinic, so the RAM, where we help folks who are struggling with addiction access medical care and medications.
Okay, thank you very much. Lily, your turn.
Thank you so much. My name's Lily Bialis, and I am the manager of Counterpoint Harm Reduction Services at Regional HIV/AIDS Connection. And at Regional HIV/AIDS Connection, which is based out of London, we support London and surrounding areas. And our mandate is to work with individuals who are living with, affected by, or at risk for HIV, AIDS, and hepatitis C. And part of that is harm reduction services. So I supervise the outreach team that is out and about in Oxford, and we partner with Southwestern Public Health to be able to provide people with harm reduction education, as well as gear.
Excellent. And last but definitely not least, Tanya, can you introduce yourself and your organization?
And I'm Tanya Dory. I work with CMHA Thames Valley Addiction and Mental Health Services. I work out of the Oxford County office, but we do serve the Thames Valley area. We have lots of different programs within CMHA, but my program specifically is the substance use program. So I provide counseling for individuals who are looking to make any kind of changes to their substance use, whether that's using safer, using less, abstinence, everything in between. So I offer individual counseling for that. We also have some group programming as well that can help people support what their goals are.
Fantastic. So I think to start right off the hop, this might be a basic question, but I think it's a really good way to kind of open up the conversation. And that's what this is for this evening. For everyone at home, we are having what I would like to think of as a somewhat casual conversation, and it's intended to be fluid. And if I do my job well, that's how that's going to go down. So to start, I think if we could maybe, if each of you could help us understand what actually is harm reduction, and sort of give us some context around that for the average person who maybe just really knows the words but nothing else. And who would like to jump in first?
I can go first.
Okay.
So like you said, Kelly, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but to me, to how I explain it, it is about keeping people as safe as possible in their drug use without requiring them to stop their use. But it's grounded in evidence and research. But it's also grounded in human rights and social justice. And it recognizes that addiction and drug use is complex and multifaceted. It's about meeting people where they're at in a non-judgmental way and treating people with dignity and respect. So in our needle exchange program, we're mandated to provide supplies to help people use drugs as safely as possible to help reduce the risk of infection, spread of infections such as HIV and hepatitis C. We also do naloxone, which helps, again, to save lives and prevent overdoses. But to me, even more important than that is about building relationships with people and giving them a safe place to come where they're welcomed and, again, treated like human beings with respect and in a non-judgmental way. And if I have made someone feel comfortable and welcome when they walk through our doors, then I feel like I've done my job well.
Okay. Thank you. Who else would like to add to that a little bit?
I would love to add, just in talking, like bringing it back to the beginning of harm reduction, talking about and understanding it as the grassroots movement that it is, really in response to HIV and AIDS epidemic. And now we see it as a response to the opioid overdose epidemic. It's also an acknowledgement. So it really was a movement that was started by people who use substances for people who use substances. And it's an acknowledgement that people who are impacted by policies the most should be involved in the creation and implementation of them. So this idea of nothing about us without us.
Okay. That's actually a really powerful statement. And I have a feeling we'll be referring back to that multiple times here this evening. Tanya, Do you have
Yeah,
anything you'd like to add?
absolutely. I was just going to add the element of choice is really important when it comes to harm reduction. So when I'm working with people in my specific counseling capacity, it's really about identifying what people want, giving them lots of choices and allowing them the autonomy to choose the way that they want, to use substances or gamble or game or use the internet, but that there's choice involved and they get to make that decision, that it's not something that we tell someone to do. They are autonomous in their choices.
Okay. Sarah.
Well, I think actually maybe it's important to say what harm reduction materials are, because I wouldn't have known what harm reduction materials were before I started in this role. So
Yeah.
we're talking about naloxone kits, which Lisa has mentioned. We're talking about clean needles, but we're also talking about sharps containers to put those needles in once they're used. We're talking about pipes, different types of pipes for different types of drugs, but also the safety things that go along with those, like the mouthpieces and screens, and then talking to people about how to use things properly and safely. So the cleanliness that goes along with it, the cleaning of the skin, the cleaning of the hands, all of the things that we do, because there's a lot of ways that you could use substances that could actually cause you harm. And so it's about making sure that when they're using substances, they're using them in the most safe way to prevent any further damage or illness while they're participating.
So this really is sort of wrapped up to try and offer support, well-being supports to meet people where they're at that particular time, right? And I think for folks, sometimes, it's really easy to sit on another side and to have sort of not, if you're not connected, if you don't have a loved one, to not have that emotional connection. But this is complicated and it is complex, and it's just not as easy as saying the best answer is just don't
Just
do
stop.
it.
Yeah.
Just stop, because and perhaps that is a great answer, but it's not one that's necessarily easy to implement. And if folks aren't there, they're just not ready for that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
And some
think that matters.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not just that they're not ready, but perhaps they're not in a position where they're able to. Maybe they're inadequately housed. They don't have housing. How is it easy to focus on substance use when we're trying to figure out where we're living tonight, where we're putting our head tonight, where our next meal is coming from? So sometimes it's not a matter of willingness or readiness. It's a matter of, am I able to?
Exactly.
That is such a good point.
And I love what Tanya said about it, like it being person-centered. People are the experts in their own lives, and we have to be there for people all along the continuum, wherever they might be. And I think that's just so important.
Okay. And so what I think sometimes has happened, and that's maybe changed a little bit through COVID, but historically, so many of these large social issues have really been deemed large urban issues, right? People think of homelessness and they would think of Toronto or different centers. So many of these things, these topics, really were thought of as they happen, but they don't really happen here in Oxford County. It's not an Oxford County thing, and I don't think, excuse me, I don't think that's Oxford. I think that's the rural lens, because there is a different form of visibility, et cetera, for certain things. My apologies. But I know, and I know you're about to tell us, these are not just large urban-ish social issues. These are issues and social challenges that every community across this country, and probably across North America anyway, have. And so I was wondering if someone would like to talk a little bit about sort of that local Oxford lens and why this really matters here in Oxford County.
The one thing that I will say, and recognizing that, I live in London and I primarily work out of London, I will say that something that we've that we've heard from people is that in the rural setting, it can make it really difficult to reach out for support, primarily because when you have a smaller area, people feel really nervous about, everybody knows everybody. People might talk, and so that's one thing that comes up that we hear often as feedback, and that comes up for people. So it really does lend to that idea of the risk of social isolation that people experience. The other thing is, ease of access of services as well. When you just being from London, going downtown, you can kind of step downtown, and within a little radius, there's a lot of social service agencies, and the area and the navigation looks a lot different in rural communities. And I know that everybody else here works in Oxford, so I'll leave it at that. But I just wanted to add that in, seeing it from a London-based context and also Oxford.
Thank you, Lily, for recognizing that, because I think what you just said could actually be cut and pasted into any of the conversations we've been having. It doesn't matter the topic, but rural communities are often very much under-resourced and underserviced. And then you add the rural component, the lack of transportation, like so many of the other pieces that we face as small rural communities compared to large urban centers, and it often makes things much more challenging. Would anyone else like to talk about sort of that local Oxford lens?
I was going to say the same thing that Lily said about the rural issue, but we'd love to think there's no drug issue in Oxford County, and it's just a big city like London or Toronto issue, but there is drug use here. And we know as long as there's human suffering, there's going to be drug use. Drugs help to dull physical and emotional pain. And then also with that rural context, your fear of accessing services because you might get outed or you know somebody that works there, etc. So that's why I think it's so important for us to be having conversations like this tonight so that we can have real and honest discussions about what's happening in Oxford County and across Canada so that we can start to address some of those concerns and help to reduce stigma so that people feel safe and able to reach out for help when and if they're ready to.
Because if we can't name it, we can't work towards making
we can't
it better.
address it and
No.
make it better. Exactly.
Mhm. Anything else anyone would like to add? Okay. Could I just ask a little kind of spin-off question? I know that COVID has really opened people's eyes to a number of sort of some of the social challenges that folks have been facing, from poverty to homelessness to mental health and addictions, to low income challenges, the host of the across the spectrum, because it really did, because so many places closed, because so many people lost hours at work. There was, homeschooling, all of the challenges that everyone faced. It really did sort of open up some of those gaps, and some of those gaps became craters, and people saw things maybe for the first time that weren't as visible before, right? When there was no place for people to go during the day, suddenly you could see more people living, or you assume living on the streets. And so I think there were some who started to think that COVID has caused all this to happen. But this is not a new phenomena that has just happened since COVID, correct? I mean, we had folks here who were using your programs and services long before COVID and sadly long after as well, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Like when you talk about the opioid overdose crisis, for instance, that's been happening for over a decade, but COVID certainly worsened it, and brought it to alarming rates. But yes, I can speak for our service. It's been going for over 20 years, and COVID changed maybe the way we provided our services, and people maybe thought we weren't available or weren't able to access it as easily. So we had to do a lot of education around that. But yes, this was here before COVID.
I would say COVID helped put us mobile, to be honest,
Right.
right? We ended
That's a
up,
win.
the bus ended up going out on the street because
Yeah.
so many of the services were closed, and we did
We
have
went
to,
to the people.
yeah, right? The office doors weren't open, so we had to take the office out.
I can tell you that was United Way was blessed to be in a position to fund the launch of the mobile outreach bus. And to this day, it is one of the proudest things I think that we have done, because it was timely, it met an immediate need, and we knew it was going to make a huge difference in people's lives. And the fact that it's been able to carry on and continue to expand with programs and services and partners, that's a real win. So it's really important to go to where people are and meet them where they're at.
Right. It's one of my favorite parts of my week, for sure.
It's an amazing service. Amazing.
Excuse me.
I just wanted to mention too, the other thing is, you know, the idea that there's a lot of visible homelessness happening right now. And when you're talking about harm reduction as well, it's important for people to acknowledge and also to know that when we're going on mobile outreach to deliver supplies, to connect with people, to provide referrals to community partner agencies, we are delivering to all areas of town. This isn't just a downtown issue. It's not just a one area, and there's lots of individuals who use substances who are housed. And when you look at also how COVID impacted people who are housed, it really did, you know, entrench that idea of the social isolation, which does, you know, make substance use addiction worse for people, and we know that. And so really looking at that and acknowledging the fact that substance use is across spectrum, and it's not just for, you know, individuals who experience homelessness.
That is so important, because again, the reason we're doing this is try to to dispel some myths. And sometimes it's really easy for all of us to see what we believe might be the few people, for instance, who might be using substances, or who might be homeless, or who might have mental health and addiction problems. And you know, one of the things that we've said certainly here is, even when referring to people, particularly in the downtown core area, people are making assumptions that they're homeless, or they're this, or they're that. We don't know that to be true necessarily at all. So I think, Lily, saying that these are issues that cover the swath of our community and across all areas is really, really important, because this could indeed be any person, anybody, any community, correct?
Okay. And when we're thinking about addiction as well, when we're thinking about substance use, we're also thinking about internet and gaming and technology. So all of that increases as well when people are feeling isolated and lonely. So when we're thinking about that picture, that, you know, the idea of the person downtown, people are struggling with addiction that's not just substance use either. It's all different kinds of addiction. And, you know, over COVID, I saw a lot of folks that I serve, that increased or began drinking because of the isolation. And then as that kind of wrapped up for them, their drinking started to subside a bit, and then sometimes it went away. And so it just depends on what's going on in people's lives and how they're feeling and what pain they're feeling, as you mentioned initially, Kelly. So it's not just about where they live. It's not about socioeconomic status or anything. I always say addiction does not discriminate. It affects everyone.
And you know, that's really interesting, because although we're sort of on the periphery as a United Way, we're not on the ground like you and your colleagues. But having been involved with, say, funding the Drug Task Force and addiction strategies through many years, I know for a fact that the number one substance that is the largest problem, if you will, in the community is alcohol. And I also know from one of the Mental Health Community United conversations that we did kind of early in COVID, that was the concern that they had with people presenting at the hospital was alcohol specific, actually. And so I think that is important, again, to put context to it, but also to allow people to see themselves, their family, their neighbors, their coworkers, their friends, like to see them as part of this conversation. And so I'm going to move into sort of, we've heard a couple of you say about meeting people where they're at and trying to offer that help that they need at that time. And so much of that is really about building relationships and building trust. And so can someone tell us why? So, we have a variety of programs, each of you have different programs, your organizations, I guess. And there are some others as well. But, why does it matter that we have multiple programs doing multiple kinds of services, but all with a goal of trust and building that relationship?
Well, I think that, when I was reflecting on this earlier, thinking about, we know a one size fits all approach does not work, right? People need options, and people need different kinds of supports to support them based on what's going on. And I think too, the other piece is recognizing that, even thinking about diversity and inclusion coming from a lens of equity versus equality. So instead of that, this is what we're going to do, we're going to have this for everybody, that may not work based on somebody's social circumstances and people's identities as well. So that came up for me when I was thinking about this.
For sure. The folks that I work with on a daily basis, many have had very negative experiences when they've reached out for help. So much of it's due to real or perceived stigma of what they might experience on the other end. So for instance, I work with people that have overdosed, and when the ambulance comes, they refuse to go to the hospital because of fear of how they might be treated once they arrive there. So, like, can you imagine having a heart attack and having the ambulance come and not going with the ambulance because you're afraid about how you've been treated? So it is a lot about building trust and, again, just treating people well and just trying to build back that, yes, you are important. Yes, we care about you. Yes, we're here for you when and if you need us. And so I think we just, as a community, have to do better to make people feel safe and comfortable to reach out. Sometimes it's just as simple as saying, "Hi, how are you today?" I had a client say, I said that once, and the client said, "That's the nicest thing anybody said to me in a whole month." Like, it's just, even just simple niceties. For some people, they don't seem to get that. And I think that's sad. And these are human beings that are struggling, and they need our compassion and support, and we need to build their trust back up so that they can and will reach out for help when they're ready and feel safe to do so.
Yeah, I agree, Lisa. People have to know where to turn, right? And so in my role on the bus, I get to go out and talk to people and meet them where they're at on the street. I get to be involved in their care. So lots of them now will come to me when they have a wound or some other medical issue that, they're not probably going to go to the emerge for. They just kind of need somebody to tell them it's okay, or a little bit of treatment. But that now relationship that we're building leads to, okay, so now I'm looking for some change, or I'm looking for this. And I get to say, well, if you want to come to the RAM clinic, I will be there on Tuesday, and me, right? And you can come in and we can have a conversation about what it is that you need, and we'll be alone. So not everybody's around listening to us, and we can kind of walk you through where you're going next. So I've had definitely quite a few people come in because they knew that they would talk to someone that they've got a relationship with and who's going to treat them nicely and they can trust, right? Because like Lisa said, a lot of folks have been treated pretty poorly, sometimes within the medical community, which I'm sorry to say is true. And so it's just nice to be able to put a, it's like a soft transfer, you know what I mean? Like,
That
But I
warm
think
transfer,
people
yeah.
have been treated poorly in any and every community, right? Whether it's someone just walking down the street or someone in a store or whatever. And so you can imagine how that just builds and builds. And then, for regardless of the reason, if people have to continually retell their story, retell their situation, that's really hard.
Mhm.
That's hard for anybody at the best of times, at the best of days, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it really does show why options and relationships and trust really matter to give people that support for when they're ready to move forward. Tanya, can I ask you? I mean, I know we're talking about addiction, and we've already talked a little bit about some of the complexities, but this is a really complicated topic. And in perhaps a minute or two, could you educate us all
Sure.
about how complicated it really is? Because it's just not as simple as saying, don't do that, right?
Oh,
Or
no.
this is bad for your health. And so,
No.
for folks that maybe don't see themselves, in this particular topic, I mean, think about, as you said, we talked about, like, it could be an internet addiction, a shopping addiction, a carb addiction. I mean, you name it, right? These are hard things.
Mhm.
And some are even harder than others. And so could you just tell us a little bit about how
Sure.
complicated it is?
Yeah. So, I mean, I actually get asked that question a whole lot because people will reach out and say, well, why can't I just stop? And why do I drink, or why do I use substances? Why do I gamble? And I always start off with, and you may have heard or may not have heard this analogy before, but the iceberg analogy is my most favorite analogy because it helps to give the Coles Notes version of substance use in a simple form. So when you're looking out in a picture, or if you've seen an iceberg in real life, you see that tip of the iceberg that's above the water. That's the addiction that we see. That's the substance use, the gambling, the gaming, the internet use, the shopping. So that's the action. What's underneath that water that we don't see is the base of it. That's all the different things that can impact someone: loneliness, isolation, trauma, depression, anxiety, poverty, all those different types of things that contribute to substance use. And so those are the things that, not one thing causes it, not one thing cures it. So we really work on those things that contribute to the substance use. The substance use is the thing that may be taking away that pain, dulling out those emotions, allowing you to live in the reality that you're living in that moment. So that really, is how I explain what addiction is. You cut off the tip of that iceberg, everything is still there. You're just pulling away that substance use or that action, but everything else is still there. And that's why you can't just stop today, because all the things you haven't addressed underneath, they're still there, and you're still struggling, and you're still in pain. And so that's why it's so complicated. And then you add in, could talk for hours and days about how our brains work and how our brains are wired to do things that make us feel good. So if I'm using a substance and it's taking away all the pain or the negative emotions or all the things I don't want to or can't manage, my brain's going to want to keep doing that thing over and over again because I'm getting relief. I'm not feeling anxiety. I'm not having traumatic flashbacks. So my brain wants me to keep doing that. So I'm going to keep drinking. I'm going to keep using that substance because my brain is saying that's the good thing to do. That's keeping me safe. It's keeping me in a better place. So, I mean, there's genetics, there's nature versus nurture and how our environments impact us. So, I mean, that's, hopefully that's a 2-minute condensed version, but they're just like, there's not one size fits all approach to assisting with addiction. There's not one explanation as to why it happens and why people experience it and why it's so difficult to move past it.
Okay. Thank you for that really brief piece, but
Very good.
I think it really
Very brief.
matters for people to understand. It just say no isn't going to do the trick here.
No.
Mhm.
If willpower was it, I wouldn't have a job. People, nobody would struggle, right? Nobody would use a substance or have an addiction at all.
Mhm. Yeah, it's not a
So true.
question of willpower at all.
true.
Which actually segues really nicely into the next question, which is really about language and words and why words matter in this particular context. And I'm just wondering if you would like to share some things that you hear as professionals in the field, or you read, or whatever that might be, and you think, oh, if only they knew better. You know, I think it's Oprah. When you know better, you do better. So this is an example of if we knew better, what would we know? Like, what would we not use? What words would be out of our vocabulary?
Words are so important. We know what damage words can do to people. Trying to use person first language. Don't use druggies or addicts or junkies or all those terrible words. A person who uses drugs, a person who uses substance, a person, their name. Just some very simple examples, but yeah, and even just our body language too. Like, people know when you start to recoil away from them, and that you're not a safe person to talk to. But just hi, welcome, those kinds of things.
Those people
Those people,
would not
terrible.
be good terminology.
No.
Right? No. Okay. Other comments?
Yeah, I think, sorry, no, go ahead, Lily. Go ahead.
Sorry. The other thing that we really work with people around and challenge ourselves and each other is around the idea of that like clean versus dirty. So when somebody uses substances, right, it's considered dirty, and when somebody stops using, it's considered clean. So for instance, when somebody maybe has support for their substance use and stops using altogether and experiences sobriety, a lot of people will say, I'm clean now, right? So what that's saying is basically the act of substance use is dirty. I'm dirty because I'm associated with that act. And that's something that, you know, we want to meet people where they're at. And a lot of the language that we hear people using in relation to their own gear is that clean versus dirty. Understanding that comes from a place of internalized stigma. So how do we lift people up? How do we you know, provide self-esteem boosts? A lot of the time staff will mirror back the language that we feel, right? So we want to say when somebody uses a syringe, it's used, and when somebody hasn't used one, it's new. So that's something that we use at our location, our agency, and really challenge the community to use as well when you find syringes in the area and whatnot.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that? And then I'm going to segue to something Lily just said. Okay, segue. So it would be kind of silly to have this conversation and not actually hone in a little bit specifically on needles and the needle exchange program, but in particular because this is very much a topical piece of conversation that happens across our communities here in Oxford, and with spring coming, and whether it's kids and pets out in parks and all of those areas, we know that we're going to see more conversation about this and about, you know, needles or syringes that are found in public spaces. And so maybe, Lisa, if I could start with you about Southwest Public Health has been running a needle exchange program, I think you said for over 20 years. But and in no way are we condoning needles in parks or anything like that. But we know, unfortunately, there's going to be some that are not going to be disposed of properly. And so could you tell us just a little bit about the program, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about some of the services that are available or the supports to help people address things if they find them.
For sure. So yes, like you said, Kelly, our program has been going since 2000. It was a mandated program by the Ministry of Health starting in 1997. And as Lily mentioned, it comes out of harm reduction, comes out of the grassroots movement of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And it's some of those courageous people who worked hard to bring programs like this about. And then again, when we were starting to see high rates of hepatitis C and HIV amongst people who use drugs, the ministry kind of mandated this program because we know it's an effective program to reduce the spread of infections like HIV and AIDS and Hep C. So we follow best practice guidelines when giving out equipment, and those best practice guidelines say that we give out the amount that people want without requiring that many back before we can give them out. So in a way, needle exchange program, I think many are going towards needle syringe program language to kind of get away from that exchange mentality. But of course, we don't want syringes found in the community. We don't want a child to pick up a needle or get poked by a needle. So we work very hard with our partners like RHAC and OCCHC and our municipal partners in trying to ensure that sharps aren't found in the community and that they're disposed of safely and properly. We have kiosks throughout the county. We also know the city has several sharps bins, like down on Wellington Street by the bus hub. There's one in Museum Square. So there are places to bring sharps back. Pharmacies will take them back. Our program obviously will take them back. Our mobile outreach will bring them and go to them and do looking around for sharps. But we also want to kind of demystify and kind of take the fear out of retrieving a sharp if you happen to see one. So it's as long as you do it carefully, it's as safe as picking up a piece of glass. As long as you do it carefully and kind of know what you're doing. If you go to our website, Southwestern Public Health, and I think in the chat or maybe after, they're going to send a link out to a video. We have like a step-by-step on how to safely pick up a syringe, and we also have a video on how to do that. And we also have a video on there talking to your kids about needles and what to do should they find a needle. Like you said, Kelly, the snow's melting, there's spring cleanups happening. So there may be sharps found, and we really want to know where they're found too. We try to do heat mapping to see if there's maybe a place we need a new kiosk. It's very much on our radar, and we take it very seriously as part of our program.
And Lisa, just real quick before we move over, I know you mentioned a couple of locations for sharps containers specific to Woodstock.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about where they might be in Ingersoll and Tillsonburg as the two other urban centers?
For sure. So we don't actually currently have one in Ingersoll, like the mailbox, the large yellow mailbox bins in Ingersoll. We've been looking for partners and also kind of trying to scout out where a location might be. In Woodstock, we have one right beside our building at 98 Graham Street. We have one at the inn, kind of in the parking lot at the inn, and then one at the entrance to the Oxford County Administration building, kind of right across from CMHA at that entrance. And then we have one in Tillsonburg at Rolfe Street behind the county housing on Rolfe Street. So, and then again, we do have a satellite needle exchange program at the OATC in Ingersoll and Tillsonburg where people can return sharps. But this is another reason why if people are hearing about areas, quote unquote, hot spots and say Ingersoll, we really do want to know so that we can help to address it by putting up a kiosk or doing outreach or what have you to try to rectify that.
So encourage people to call public health. And I believe we're sharing a link to a video on how to safely pick up and dispose of sharps. Lily, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yes, so our team actually works with CMHA to facilitate a syringe recovery program. So the team goes out into the community within walking distance from where they start, and they will pick up syringes and other materials in the area. They also will occasionally, pick up garbage and whatnot as they come across it. Um, so if anybody has any particular locations, they can also feel free to reach out to Southwestern Public Health directly. I also provided the information for our outreach team, and our outreach team can go out and work directly with, business owners, with individuals to provide that direct one-on-one coaching and training.
Excellent. Okay. I don't think we can have this conversation on harm reduction and what it is without actually, there's to me a little bit of an elephant in the room that generates a lot of negative talk and has for many, many years. And that would be the methadone clinic, which is not even usually referred to as a methadone clinic. And I think that that's because there's a ton of misunderstanding or misinformation about what that service is. And so I'm going to maybe start with Tanya to talk a little bit about how that's there to help people. And it is part of harm reduction. And then maybe to Sarah a little bit to connect to the RAM clinic as well, to just so we have a better understanding. So Tanya, we'll start with you.
So first, I want to say that one of the main misconceptions when we call it the methadone clinic, people can believe that it's it's crystal meth. It's not. Crystal meth is a stimulant. Methadone is not. So it is actually, it's used to help people. It's an opioid agonist, sorry. So it actually is a pain reliever. So what it's meant to do, it's meant to help people when they're experiencing withdrawal. So when you're feeling body pain and pain, just pain in your bones, you're feeling nauseous, you're having a fever, this medication actually, stops that from happening. So people can actually get up in the morning and they can do things that are meaningful in their life. They can go and connect with friends, with their community. They can go to work. They can go for a walk, and they're not at home struggling and in pain. And then thinking, well, how am I going to get rid of this? This is going to last for days. I'm in agony. I use again, the pain is gone. So this is a way, it's an opioid substitution therapy. So it's a medication that is given to people in proper doses that helps them to relieve this pain, this withdrawal, and helps them to make meaning out of their life, to do the things that they want to do. And if it's used as appropriate, it's a medication. Just like a heart medication or a diabetes medication, it's a medication.
And withdrawal really is physically hell, is it not?
Yeah, I have never personally experienced opioid withdrawal, but I have heard so many people in the last decade explain, I've seen it firsthand. It is awful. So we want to get rid of that pain. When we talk about substance use and pain, it's not just emotional pain, it's physical pain. Absolutely. It's a way to be able to live a meaningful life.
So people there are there for treatment, for help,
Yes.
to get better, to be able
Yes.
to be fully functional in society.
Yes.
Sarah, do you want to kind of segue to the RAM clinic a little bit?
Sure.
Because a lot of people won't know what that is.
Right. And so for a long time, methadone was the kind of number one treatment if someone was addicted to an opiate. Then methadone was kind of what they had as a choice for treatment. But now we have some other medications that we are able to help people with. And so the RAM clinic is very similar to the methadone clinic in that people come in to get treatment for an addiction. We have treatment for opiates, and we have treatment for alcohol. We unfortunately don't have, there's no treatment for crystal meth at this time, or at least no approved treatment. There's some experimental things that happen, but so we still see people with addictions to other things, and we mostly hook them up with Tanya to talk about their addiction and get the counseling that they need, because that's honestly 50% of the treatment is to get into the counseling and to have somebody to talk to about what is going on and what the strategies are to deal with the cravings and the because it's a lifestyle at that point generally,
Which
right?
is such a, I mean, we're huge fans of the Oxford County Community Health Center, but it's that wraparound approach to really help people, right?
Right.
And so the RAM clinic is available in Woodstock, and you have another location as well, Sarah, in the county? Or does
Currently
it?
Woodstock.
Oh, currently it's just Woodstock.
Currently
Okay.
Woodstock. There's hopes to open up more, but right now we'll just have to do a plug for some more funding.
That's always a potential
Right?
win from this as well, because there's a need, right? We want to identify that there's
Well,
gaps
and we
there's
have
needs.
people driving in from all over the county. I mean, the truth is we've had people from outside the county trying to get treatment, right? Because they've got to, well, some people don't want treatment in their own community, to be honest, right? There's that stigma piece that they're like, actually, I'll drive to make sure that no one knows that I'm coming here, kind of thing. But it's the same, it's a similar medication, but we use is Suboxone. And Suboxone helps people, we can get people on it a little bit quicker to a comfortable level of medication than they can with methadone. Generally, methadone's a bit of a longer titration. They're both equal though, like 100, they are equal. They're both treatments for addiction, and we're happy to have both options available in the community. And then we also have a longer acting one now that it's once a month. So once you get onto the Suboxone, you can get an injection that you only have to come in once a month. So guess what? There's your life back a little bit, right? Yeah.
I think this is actually for perhaps people at home or in the community that are watching and listening. That's maybe a really interesting takeaway to help explain what those services are that they may not have really understood before. And as we've been talking this evening, we've been really talking specific about programs and services for individuals who are using substances, but some of your programs and services really also wrap around families, loved ones, friends, etc. So these programs and supports go way beyond the individuals in particular that you're there to serve, but also the community at large, correct?
Absolutely. I sent a family, I think, over to you, Tanya, last week as well, right? Where it was the one family member had the addiction, but the other family member was really struggling, trying to understand why are you doing this? Why are you acting like this? I've given you everything I can, kind of thing. And so it's really important because the one person is not going to really heal in that relationship without both of them getting a little bit of help.
Okay. So we had a question earlier, and it's a little bit related to what my next question was about. We've heard a lot over the last few years, in particular, maybe a decade, about the over prescription use of prescription opioids, and then the ramifications of that, and how that's really negatively impacted people. But there are a lot of different drugs on the street, and our streets are no different than anyone else's streets, correct? And there's a host of substances. And so someone asked a question, and I'm just going to pull it up so I do it justice. If you give me 1 second. Some substances are illegal to possess. And so how does that complicate your efforts in helping people who can't stop using those substances?
I mean, I can speak from a counseling perspective. My perspective, my job is not to judge whether someone's using a substance or not, and it's not a legal responsibility for me to report that. So just to be able to talk to a person about what they're using, if they want to use safer, if they want to use less, if they want to stop, if they just want to come in and talk because they have things that they just need to talk about. So in my perspective, I'm going to say it's irrelevant whether it's illegal or not, because I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to report you. We're just here to talk. So that would be my perspective.
I think we're
I
in a
would agree.
position where we're in a fight to keep people alive,
Yeah.
right? People are dying in this county every month. There are overdoses that kill people. And so
day.
our goal, yeah, almost every day, but our goal is to
Oh.
keep our folks alive in order to give them treatment, in order to give them choice, in order to make sure that they're living the best life that they can. But yeah, right now it's just a struggle for us. Sometimes really that's our goal, is that this person's alive the next time they come in, wherever they're supposed to come in.
I think that is so powerful, Sarah,
So true,
because
Sarah.
yeah, that really puts this in perspective. I mean, if as a community we want people to live healthy lives, we want well-being and health and happiness and all those things for people, we want them to get there. They can't get there unless we can keep them alive to hopefully maybe get there. And that was so powerful. And I think the community needs to know, because these things are not necessarily always front page news. I mean, nationally, you see stats. Some of the national stats, quite frankly, are heartbreaking and ugly and awful when you look at how many people are dying of drug overdoses daily. I think nationally it's over 20 a day. 20 people in our country a day are dying. And
Right.
that's not some of the other challenges, but so are our people, our Oxford, our families, our neighbors, our coworkers, our friends, our children, right?
And in fact, some disturbing stats have kind of been brought to our attention recently, where if you look at rates, Oxford's rates are actually higher than Ontario's rates right now of deaths around opioids. So yeah, it's so true, Sarah, that people are dying.
And let's not let's think of the echo, right? Too,
Mhm.
right? So somebody dies of overdose. Well, they've got parents, they've got kids, they've got family, they've got friends, and now all of these other people are at greater risk, right? And of not just of overdose, but of mental health and of grief and of job security and things like that when they're dealing with the loss of a loved one. And then how far do these echoes go within our community? We're all harmed when someone dies suddenly or accidentally in the community, right?
And then to add to that, you add the stigma of how somebody died, and you can't grieve the same way somebody, say, would if their family member died of cancer. It adds a whole other level. And I think what Tanya was saying earlier, to me, the illegality of it is irrelevant, and that's where we can sometimes get into some of that moral judgment, and that leads to stigma about right and wrong, and oh, that's illegal. And it's again just so much more complicated than that. And so many people that I see, and I'm sure everyone around this table has seen, was given a prescription for an opioid at some point due to pain or an injury and such, and for whatever complex reason led to an addiction. And like with OxyContin and what happened with OxyContin, we know in Oxford County that's always been a big concern. And the hope was when it was delisted that people would just magically be their addiction would be cured, but we know that's not true. And in fact, it led to more serious drugs and in many cases dangerous drugs, which kind of has opened, in my opinion, opened up the vacuum to bring fentanyl onto the scene. And now it's an absolute crisis. I was mentioning earlier that we've been in an opioid overdose crisis for like a long time, but it's just gotten to like a fever pitch. It's just really, really terrible right now.
So we as a community, we need to hear this, because these they are truly, there are people, there are citizens, these are our family members, and people need to understand, that they may not be alone and that there's help there for families and for individuals, but also that we need to talk about this, because we need to stop the negative talk to get rid of some of the stigma so that people can access supports, that these lives matter, right? And everyone has a right to well-being, has a right to belong in our community.
And these deaths are preventable. We can prevent them if we can be more open and honest and reduce stigma and wrap
Mhm.
ourselves around everybody and make
Mhm.
them part of the everybody's part of this community. It doesn't matter who you are.
Well, and we've been talking about harm reduction materials in regards to people who have addictions, but I've encountered some families that have felt very empowered to be given an naloxone kit, right? And like now, okay, like I feel like at least I have some equipment here to deal with this situation that's happening.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And more businesses are also having naloxone kits on site. I think for if something were to happen, if there was a crisis, if there was a customer, whatever that might be. And so I think there's the kits are available free of charge, correct?
Mhm.
And there is kind of easy to use training that can go with those as well.
Yeah, it's very easy. I see that Amanda just put in the chat the website where you can just Google where to get a free naloxone kit, and it brings you to a ministry page where you type in your postal code and it'll bring up all the pharmacies and programs in that area where you can go and get a naloxone kit. And yes, it should be free. Many pharmacies might require you to give them your health card, but again, it's just a way of tracking how many kits are being given out. It's not, there shouldn't be any charge related to it. And yes, we want naloxone in the hands of people that might, you just like we talked before, like Tanya said, addiction and overdose does not discriminate. It could happen to anyone. So the more people that have a kit and know how to use one, the better.
And I think everybody on this panel has probably heard me say this a million times, but naloxone should be part of everyone's first aid kit. It is a life-saving measure, just like you'd have gauze or wound care or Band-Aids. You could walk down the street and someone could be overdosing. And as Kelly mentioned, these are members of our community. When we take away, I know that the people that I work with, so many people walk in with so much shame. They're already feeling that from substance use, many people. So if we can focus on dignity of everyone, get a naloxone kit, use it if you need it, carry it, put it in your first aid kit. It's a life-saving measure, and if we normalize that, there's less stigma, and then people aren't going to look and say, oh, that's an naloxone kit, I don't want to touch that. It can save someone's life.
Yeah. And to your point, Lisa, that we are in literally a crisis. Saving lives has to come first.
It has to come first. Yeah.
I just want to say, and I'm trying to keep a little bit of an eye on some of the Q&A, and I know Amanda's behind the scenes helping us as well. But there are so many fantastic comments thanking each of you for your work, your compassion, the fact that you're just helping so many people and that you're caring and just really making a difference. And so I just, on behalf of the community that's watching or this evening and or perhaps at a later date, to each of you and your colleagues and your organizations, you really are saving lives. And in turn, you are changing lives. And so we are very grateful for the work you do. So thank you very much. I know it is nice, isn't it? You should hear that because usually you don't get to hear always the good things. Someone just wrote in, how do we know if someone's experiencing an overdose or having an overdose? And so what do people need to look for to think, oh my goodness, this is what I need to do, and this is the who I need to call immediately?
So I can say that if you're sitting with somebody and they stop talking, if you go up to somebody and you notice that somebody seems to be passed out, and if you call their name, if you're talking to them, if you're, maybe shaking them a little bit, moving their foot and they're not responsive, then that is a time where, we say to people, treat that as an overdose situation. We want people to administer naloxone. There's training around that, and then we really want people to call 911 in that situation. Anytime somebody is non-responsive. There are also other signs of overdose, such as, somebody's skin might turn blue. It might be that their lips are just turning a little bit purple. So also with overdose, what can sometimes happen is a person can sound like they're snoring or making noise. So a lot of the times people will assume people are actually asleep when that's not the
Oh.
case. So that's also something to be mindful of. If somebody sounds like they're snoring, but they're still not responsive to you, then we would treat that as an overdose situation.
So that would be a case of better safe than sorry. And to
Yes.
make that, and if you don't have a kid on you, make that 911 call immediately.
regardless.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
And I think a misconception as well is if people aren't sure if it's opioid overdose or not, give it anyways. It doesn't have an adverse reaction. So if you haven't used an opiate, it's not going to hurt
To
you.
do anything.
Yeah, and unfortunately with a tainted drug supply, we may have benzodiazepines in with an opiate, and that's already a central nervous system depressant. So you're already, that doesn't work on a benzodiazepine. So
Yep.
just give the naloxone. Hopefully it will help, but call 911.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an
Bring the
important
experts
message.
there.
That's right. And they are literally just a call away.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting question is how do we stop that negative talk and help people understand that addiction or substance use isn't a moral failing?
Mm.
I think the one thing is to really, challenge some of that internal bias, to think about what bias that we do have, to think about, what influences that we see on a daily basis, like TV, like movies, like, how people talk about addiction in everyday life, and to really challenge some of that deep in ourselves. This idea of, why doesn't somebody just get support? As we've said many times, it's so much deeper than that. A lot of people, and I'm sure, Tanya, that you see this all the time, but if people could, then they would, right? And that wouldn't be a question for people. So I think really challenging some of that internalized bias around, why do I think that way about substance use? What is that about for me? And where is that coming from? Can be really helpful to kind of challenge and support other people in challenging that idea that substance use is a moral failing.
And that's what the goal of this is, right? That this can open up dialogue, whether it's around your kitchen table dinner tomorrow night or, at your book club or your workplace. It's just a good conversation starter, I think. And that's a really good point.
I would say too that just like we've all worked through that. None of us have come here from a point of no bias, right? We've all worked through it. We've all gone, oh, like, what? I don't know why I even thought that kind of thing. Like as we work through and we learn more about it, just forgive yourself if you're having.
Yeah, doesn't make
some
you a bad person.
Right? Like we've all kind of had to work through all that to and still are, honestly, like coming up against things that we go, oh, why I did think that. Maybe I'll just work through that myself.
Yeah. I think the important piece is that awareness, right? That we can't control what pops into our head initially, but we can decide what to do with it. So, I'm sure everyone is impacted in some way by addiction, loving someone that has addiction. And that often is the reason that we think the things that we do, our values, how we've been raised, all those different things. So just really reflecting on, I like what Lisa, why am I thinking that? Because then you're actually opening up that dialogue. You're reducing some stigma. You're thinking about it. You're not just judging.
Yeah.
Because
That's
it is
great.
hard. Like even when you intellectually might understand that you shouldn't think a certain way right. I mean, when you put your emotions into it and your heart into it, and if it's breaking your heart and you want to see it fixed, that makes it hard.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There's an interesting question about when we talk about the importance of words and language. We talk about overdose versus poisoning? Very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let Lily take this one.
And this one is definitely, something that is, I'm going to say something and it might be a little bit controversial. I think that it's this idea of connecting with people who use substances around what the language preferences are, right? So we know that some things come from that internalized stigma, internalized bias, and we need to, we can support people through that, right? We can work to change that. However, sometimes what happens is in a moment of advocacy, of advocating for, okay, really it is a poisoning. And that is the truth, right? The drug supply is poisoned, it is tainted. We know this. And really, in that moment of advocacy, of us wanting to do better, and the intention is great. However, sometimes the impact can be maybe a little bit offside. So I think that in terms of individuals who use substances, what people really connect with is the term overdose. And people, some of the individuals that I see on a daily basis, if I said to them an opioid poisoning, they wouldn't understand what I'm talking about. And so I think this is one of those times where connecting with individuals who use substances to ask for opinion around the language use is a really good idea to keep that at the forefront. Now, somebody who uses substances could prefer the term opioid poisonings, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. We know that these overdoses aren't something that's intentional. And we know that it's not always because of somebody's tolerance. We know that it's so much more complex than just an overdose scenario. However, that's the language that we utilize just because it works for people, it makes sense to people, and that's the language that people come in and use. And hopefully I said that without challenging or, in a way that makes sense. Yeah.
All good.
That was good.
Thank you. This is an interesting question, I think. Do you have any suggestions on how to celebrate someone's, success with sobriety without stigmatizing their drug use? Like what kind of language would you suggest? And they also, a little segue, that they love the commentary on the clean versus the dirty, that they'd never thought of the language in that way, and that was very powerful. But nice to celebrate. And so do you have a suggestion for that particular scenario?
So I know in working with individuals, the first thing is to identify what is your definition of success. So does success mean that you're not using? Does it mean you're using less? Does it mean, that you are sober? What I tend to do is just acknowledge people in that moment, in that day. How are you feeling? How does it feel right now? What's going on good in your life? Focusing on those positive things without saying, sometimes people like to reflect and say, what wasn't going well for me when I was using? What are the reasons that I maybe don't want to go back there if I'm not using? Or what are the reasons that if I use via IV versus smoking, what was more difficult for me then? What is better for me now? And just acknowledging where you are right now and how you feel versus saying that was not good or that wasn't success. And in a harm reduction lens, I mean, I work with many people who are working on a moderation goal where they're drinking, 1 or 2 times a week, a set amount, and that's their success. And that they're coming from, drinking multiple cans of beer, for example, per day to 1 a day. And that is success. And that's where they want to be. And that's amazing. And so that's a moment to be able to say harm reduction works, moderation works. This is what that person wanted, and they've achieved that. So it doesn't have to be sobriety or abstinence to be a success. What is your definition of success?
And I think along with that too is, life is not linear for people. Life ebbs and flows. People come up against challenges, and I think recognizing that where somebody's at right here, right now, in this moment, that's what's important. And that could change tomorrow, and that's okay. So one thing that we talk about with staff is, a lot of people want to celebrate the fact that I've stopped using, because it's really, really hard work, right? That people put into that. And so how can we support people in celebrating that while also letting them know, hey, we're here for you if that changes. So the one thing that we say to people is, hey, I'm really excited that that's where you're at in your journey right now. And we're always here for you.
Mhm.
right? So really,
Fine.
not necessarily making a huge deal about it and not really focusing on, yes, and you will stay sober and you will stay not using. It's not about that. It's really about recognizing that's amazing. And, I'm here for you.
Yeah. And I think
Okay.
that comes with that trust element. If someone doesn't, I've had people that when trust isn't achieved yet or they're new, they might not tell me they've had a relapse because they're worried. They're afraid that they're going to let somebody down. So I love that, Lily, how it's, I'm going to celebrate where you're at right now, but whatever happens, you're still important and, you can achieve the goals you want to achieve, whether they're abstinence-based or not. But opening the door so that they continue to come back and they don't feel stigmatized when they're not achieving what they want to achieve in that moment.
We don't have a lot of time left, and I do have one final wrap-up question that I want you all to take a moment on, but I want to get to a couple of others before we have to say goodnight. And one is, could you explain a little further about community treatment versus residential treatment? Because
Yeah.
they often, the comment is often people may believe that a residential treatment program is the best or the only option. But I'm sure that each and every one of you have tremendous success stories as well that aren't residential treatment programs. So would anyone like to just speak for a moment on that?
I can.
I feel like Tanya.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
love to, because it's a question I get a lot, right? People think, and I get a lot of calls from families saying, so-and-so is really struggling. They need to go to residential treatment. They need to go away. So I look at treatment as a stepped approach. So community treatment is when you're meeting with a counselor, you're getting some kind of support in your community. You're able to learn skills, utilize counseling, supports, groups, whatever that looks like in the community. You're still able to perhaps work if you're working, you're able to keep connections. Some people have animals. They don't want to go away to residential treatment because that's important to them. So we'll start in the community. We'll come and meet with me. We'll chat. We'll work on some goals. We'll work on the things you want to work on. And then sometimes people need to go to residential treatment. They need to, or they identify that they need to leave where they're at to go and get some intensive, 24/7, because they're really struggling to do it in their community. But I really look at it like that stepped approach where, it isn't one size fits all. Residential treatment is not a magical fix. You don't send someone away to residential treatment and they come back fixed. It doesn't work that way. And unfortunately, a lot of people experience disappointment and frustration when they think that people are going to come home and everything's going to be okay.
And it would be easy to think that, to
Yeah,
hope that,
of
right?
course.
To want that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just before I get to my last question, because we're down to 4 minutes, I just someone did ask why would our numbers be a little higher than the provincial average when we obviously have lots of wonderful programs and services, but is there anything in particular that we know about that, or is that just something that tends to ebb and flow a little bit as well?
Yeah, I would not profess to be a statistician or
No.
any expert in this area. And our rates have always been close to similar to the Ontario rates, and for whatever reason, it's just kind of gone a little bit above this past year. And there's so many different things. I think COVID has a huge part of that, but of course, COVID was across the whole province. So I can't really explain personally why that might be this year. Hopefully, it's a trend that starts to go back down and it's not an upward trend. We just have to keep looking at ways to getting those numbers back down.
What I'm going to say to folks before we ask our final question is we can't answer all of your questions, and I'm really sorry that we can't. We do have resources that we've put out so websites and things following. For those that are registered here this evening, you will get a follow-up email, and we will have other resources attached to that as well. But I do want to remind people, if you're looking for help as a family member, if you're looking for help on how to talk to a youth in your family or in your community, if you want to do other, you want access to other information, please reach out. Again, 211 could be a starting point. Any of the organizations from CMHA, Thames Valley Addiction Mental Health Services, to the Regional HIV/AIDS Clinic, to the Oxford County Community Health Center, to Southwest Public Health, to others as well. There are great supports in this community who would be happy to try and help you navigate whatever questions you may have. And so my last question as we wrap up here this evening is, what is the one takeaway that you hope everyone listening will take from our conversation, or learn or think about from our conversation here this evening? So Lily, I'll start with you.
So I think for me, the one takeaway is, hopefully people recognize that people are human beings, and that, one way to show care for people is especially just the idea of walking downtown. If somebody looks asleep on the sidewalk, if somebody is panhandling, if somebody is sitting there, I think the idea is acknowledge presence, make eye contact, and that's something minimum that people can do that just says, hey, I see you and I appreciate you as a fellow human. And that's the one takeaway, I think, for me.
Thank you. Sarah.
I hope people will understand that harm reduction is a good thing. It's a service that we provide in the community to make the entire community more safe. And just it's not a perfect system. So if there are concerns, then just give one of us a call. But harm reduction is a good thing.
Lisa.
My message is just pretty simple, just to be kind. We know from what we've talked about today, drug use and addiction is a very complex issue and we as a community need patience and understanding to help address the complexity of it. But while we're doing that, people are dying, and they're dying at alarming rates under a shroud of stigma and shame, and family are mourning the loss of their loved ones. So these are human beings, and they deserve our kindness, our love, and our support.
Excellent. And last but not least.
So I echo all of those things, but also just to be open to hearing, to be open to other perspectives, because that's how we learn, that's how we reduce stigma. So just be open to listen, and try to hold back those judgments.
Okay, thank you. And so I said at the top, I was going to start with a quote, and I'm from Dr. Mattei, and I'm going to end with one as well. Addiction is not a choice that anybody makes. It's not a moral failure. It's not an ethical lapse. It's not a weakness of character. It's not a failure of will, which is how our society depicts addiction. Nor is it an inherited brain disease, which is how our medical tendency is to see it. What it actually is, it's a response to human suffering. And all these people that I worked with and had been seriously traumatized as children. All of the women had been sexually abused. All of the men had been traumatized, some of them sexually, physically, emotionally neglected. And not only is that my perspective, it's also what the scientific and research literature show. So addiction then, rather than being a disease as such or a human choice, is an attempt to escape suffering temporarily. And that is another powerful quote from Dr. Gabor Maté, who really has spent his career doing work to help people struggling in Vancouver and across the country. And I think it really does capture the complexity, but the deep-rooted pain that is part of all of this. And I think we all must remember that first and foremost as we talk about some of these challenging, unignorable social issues, and how as a community we need to come together to ensure that people can stay alive and stay safe and healthy and have options for a better tomorrow. So to each of you ladies, I thank you so very, very much for taking the time out of your evening to join us and to share your wisdom and your knowledge and your experience. I thank you and your colleagues and your organizations for the amazing work you do to help people across Oxford County. For everyone who's joined this evening, thank you for taking the time out of your evening to learn a little more for your interest in this particular topic. I urge you to share it. Talk about it at the water cooler tomorrow when you go to work, or at an upcoming soccer game, or whatever you happen to be at. But because the more we can talk about it, the more we can reduce the stigma and build awareness and understanding, and that really matters. Again, the resources are going to be available. This video will be available on our website within a couple of days, and shortly available on Rogers Cable. If you want to learn more about what United Way Oxford is doing, our programs and services, our investments in the community, or upcoming topics like this, please register for our e-newsletter. I promise you, we don't harass, we won't inundate you with these newsletters, but once a month, we really like to tell you a little bit about what's going on in our community and share information that we think really matters. And so we always say it takes a village, and we are grateful for you tonight here to be part of our village. And together we can build a healthier, happier Oxford County for everyone. And isn't that what we all want for the place that we call home? So thank you for joining us, and have a lovely evening. Good night.